We carry out thousands of excavations every year. This exposes you to risks that, if you don't take the appropriate action, may result in you or your colleague being injured. I personally want to make sure that you always go home safely to your family and friends at the end of every shift. Breaking ground and excavating is one of the most high-risk activities you will carry out. The Safe Digging Charter represents the minimum we expect of anyone breaking ground and excavating. The main reason for putting the Prove It campaign together was to help you remember the key stages of the Safe Digging Charter. However, we are still hitting services, as not all of the appropriate steps are always being taken, and people like you are getting hurt. The following video has been created to help you identify the risks and how to avoid them, to carry out observations and look for those telltale signs, to plan ahead, to work methodically and safely, to identify change and stop when things aren't as they were originally planned.
POWER, Point of Work Risk Assessment. Before starting work, all the hazards and controls measures should be recorded in a point of work risk assessment and briefed to all those involved. This is not just a legal requirement. Nobody here at Kier wants to see anyone get hurt, and that we all go home safe after every shift. The fact is, anyone can, if they choose, prevent hazards causing harm during work activities by taking preventative measures and following safe methods of work. By recording these on a point of work risk assessment, it is an easy and effective way to let everyone on site understand what the hazards are and what control measures have been put in place. You get out of it what you put into it. The point of work risk assessment doesn't stop when the discussion stops. You will, during your shift, come across hazards that weren't considered during the initial discussion, or maybe the weather conditions have changed, affecting the control measure already in place. Don't ignore change. Always stop, review, and where possible, introduce new measures to mitigate the risk. Whoever is taking the lead on the job, it's your responsibility to speak up. This is your chance to point out anything you consider may cause harm to you or others. Work as a team when on site. All of you will, at some point, see different hazards and know how to remove or reduce them. As the old saying goes, 2 eyes are better than 1. Let's recap on how a point of work risk assessment works. To start with, all the hazards on site should be identified, and by looking at what work activities are going to take place, hazards can then be recorded on the assessment form. For each hazard identified, you now need to consider who or what could be harmed and evaluate the likelihood of it happening and the severity of the outcome. Lastly, for every hazard identified, you should try to find a method where the risk can be eliminated from the works area, or if this is not possible, a control measure to prevent incidents needs to be put in place and recorded on the assessment form. The following P's will help you recognize the hazards you need to record on the assessment form, and how to identify the control measures needed to prevent incidents occurring. It's everyone's responsibility to look and point out hazards. Before breaking ground, identify the hazards, assess who can be harmed, eliminate or control the risk, record your findings. If things change, do not ignore change. Stop, review, and introduce new measures. Plan. Before you go ahead and start scanning and marking the area to be excavated, you should have to hand the appropriate utility service drawings. It is important that you can interpret the information from the utility plans. Don't be embarrassed to ask for help. The best way to learn is for somebody to show you. Plans should be no older than 3 months old, and gas plans should be no older than 28 days. Also, check the scale. Don't use illustrations that are more than 1/500th scale, and they should all be in colour. Make sure the utility plans you receive match the area you are to be excavating in. Look for key features like house numbers, shapes of buildings, and, most important of all, street names. Read the legend of the utility plans, showing the key features like shut-off valves, chambers, poles, underground and overhead plant, live or disused apparatus. Identify clear points of reference, for example, the corner of a building, and work back to your planned excavation point. Now examine the detail of the utility plans. Use the drawings to give you additional information like cable voltage and size, pipe size, types of pressures, and material type. All this will give you an understanding of what lies under the surface and what you and your colleagues are going to come up against during your excavating activities. Before breaking ground, always study and review utility plans. Make sure the plans are up to date. Make sure they match your excavation area. Identify clear points of reference. Use them to determine what is under your planned excavation. No plans, no dig. If you are unsure, stop and call your supervisor. Paint. You have studied the plans, you now need to examine the area. This is the third P, paint. Although not always obvious, look for indications that underground services exist. If there are lampposts, illuminated traffic signs, there will be cabling to them. Look for meter boxes on the side of buildings. The services could be in line with these. A good indication is the evidence of reinstated trenches. However, if there are no such indications, this does not mean there are no underground services. Plans and visual inspections alone are not enough to identify and locate services. Therefore, you must now scan the area using your CAT and Jenny. Remember, it is vital you scan in all 4 modes, and always use the Jenny. The use of the Jenny in conjunction with the CAT is proven to locate 50% more apparatus in the ground than using the CAT on its own. Make sure you have good connections when connecting the Jenny, and it is at least 10 meters away from the excavation. This may take a few minutes more, but one of the biggest reasons for a service strike was because the operative had only scanned in one mode and not used the Jenny. When you receive signals from below the surface, trace the signals beyond the point of the excavation and mark up the appropriate colors: red for electric, yellow for gas, etc. Your marking up doesn't need to be a Picasso, but it should be clear enough for everyone working on the excavation to understand. Once you have marked up the services you located, you now need to mark up an encroachment zone. This area should extend 300 mm either side of the found service. The encroachment zone is not to be broken by mechanical methods until the depth of the services have been confirmed to be more than 300 mm deep. Before breaking ground, look for evidence of underground services. Always scan using both your CAT and Jenny. Always scan in all 4 modes. Trace services beyond your excavation area. Always mark out an encroachment zone. Use the correct colors for marking each identified service. If you are unsure, stop and call your supervisor. Permit to dig. You now should have all the information to create a permit to dig, our next P. A permit to dig is your own written authorization to proceed with the excavation operations. It's your last chance to take a step back and look at your site. Check that every step you have conducted so far is safe and all the hazards have been identified, and a final check that you have considered every eventuality from your excavation activities. The permit to dig is there for you to make the judgment of how you are going to proceed and gives you the opportunity to stop and consider your plan. It is also mandatory for each hole you dig. You will need to consider how you are going to break ground and expose buried services. Look at your marking out of the traced utilities. Is there somewhere to break ground by mechanical means without breaking out directly above a known traced signal? If so, then mark this area up as SP, safe place. If this method of work cannot be achieved, then stop and consult your supervisor. It is your experience and skill that ensures breaking ground is done safely. Don't let time restraints be a judge at this point. You must decide what is the safest method. If you are still unsure, ask your supervisor. Remember, you must only hand dig within 500 mm of any service and extend this to 3 meters for a medium pressure gas main. Do not break ground until you have completed a permit to dig. Check every step is safe. Ensure all hazards are identified and recorded. Consider every eventuality. Mark up the safe place to dig. Unless you have a safe system of work in place, only hand dig within 500 mm of traced surfaces. Unless you have a safe system of work in place, only hand dig within 3 meters of a medium gas main. If you answer no to any step, you do not have permission to proceed or break ground. If you are unsure, stop and call your supervisor. Proximity. Before you break ground, you need to consider where the excavation is about to take place. What would be the impact of removing ground on the surrounding area? Look at what structures are near and assess if you are going to require any bracing for any column, walls or foundations. If there is a pole or column within 1 meter of your planned excavation, then an assessment should be made of the ground to check if the structure will need to be braced to prevent it from falling. Work conducted within 3 meters of temporary scaffold should not be carried out under any circumstances. There are strict rules to be observed when digging close to trees. All trees have some sort of protection status, some more than others, but as long as we follow what the guidelines state, then prosecution from the Environment Agency or local council authority can be eliminated. Some trees will have a tree preservation order on them, and we all should know how to identify them and what we can and cannot do around them. A common sign of this is a tag nailed to the trunk with a serial. A safe method of work is to treat all trees as though they have TPOs on them. Then there can be no mistakes. Think about where you are going to stockpile excavated material, as the weight of the material may cause unwanted issues during your activities. As a precaution, once you begin to excavate, keep the material at least the depth of the excavation away from the edge. This may prevent the weight of the stockpiled material causing unnecessary surcharge and collapsing the trench unexpectedly. If you draw an imaginary line from the bottom of the excavation out at 45 degrees, then generally anything within this zone could have or may have an effect on the excavation, and the removal or support of this item should be found. As we dig thousands of excavations each year in all manner of places, urban and rural, there is a likelihood of us disturbing or coming across something of archaeological interest. It's our duty to report any strange findings. If you suspect anything you unearth, then stop and contact your supervisor. As you break ground, never break through the encroachment zone until the depth of the surfaces are proven. Consider the impact of breaking ground on the surrounding area. Never excavate within 3 meters of scaffolding. Treat all trees as though they are protected. Consider where you will stockpile your excavated material. Report any strange findings. Works within 1 meter of a pole or column must be referred to a supervisor and the asset owner must be contacted. Plant. You are now going to break ground. This is the time to select the best tool for the job. Only use tools that are insulated and have curved edges. Ease spades and shovels into the ground with gentle foot pressure, in parallel to any surfaces. Don't ever throw a spike into the ground. This is the P for plant. If you are going to need to use mechanical means, you will need a banksman. Remember, don't have distractions and switch off mobile phones. You must check that there is at least 300 mm clearance above any surfaces. Never cut across your traced surfaces. One of the most common utility strikes is hitting shallow surfaces. Ensure you dig down from your safe place, then across. Prove there is nothing under the top layer before removing it. As you dig, rescan your excavation at least every 150 mm, including the sides of the trench. If you are slip trenching to locate unknown surfaces, it is recommended you should dig diagonally across to capture all possible surfaces. Otherwise, dig parallel to known traced surfaces. As you excavate, never throw a spike into the ground. Always use insulated tools. Make sure your phone is not a distraction. Keep scanning your excavation every 150 mm. Check there is at least 300 mm clearance above any surfaces. Always dig down and across to locate surfaces. If you are unsure, stop and call your supervisor. Protect. When you have exposed a surface, you must continue to expose it for its entire length of the excavation. However, an exposed surface is at risk. This is where the next P comes into play. Protect. Use surface protection boards when possible to protect the surface from debris whilst excavation continues, and to stop accidental objects falling on them. Using your experience, make sure you've fully identified all exposed cables. Poly or metal surfaces must be treated as electric until proven otherwise. If you are unsure, stop and call your supervisor. As your excavation continues, ensure you are still using the cat and jenny as you dig. Also check the depth of your excavation. Anything more than 1.2 meters will need support. Again, stop and contact your supervisor. As you excavate, excavate found surfaces fully. Identify all exposed surfaces before proceeding. Always use protection boards to protect exposed surfaces. Keep scanning using both the cat and jenny. Only break out ground above a surface once you have proven there is at least 300 millimeters of clearance above it. Check the depth of your excavation. If you are unsure, stop and call your supervisor. Pump. As we said earlier, anything can change during your excavation, and this can include water. If you find the excavation is starting to fill with water, you must not continue to dig blind. You will now need to use the last P of Prove It. Pump. Pumping out is the easy bit. However, deciding where the discharge will go needs some serious consideration. For almost all situations, the filter socks must be used. You must also consider where the water is going to end up. Will it affect the local watercourses? You may require a permit before you start to discharge the water. If the water is a result of a damaged water pipe, think about having the supply temporarily shut off. But overall, if you are unsure, stop and speak to your supervisor. As you excavate, stop if your excavation fills with water. Never dig blind. Always use filter socks. Consider where the discharge will go. If you are unsure, stop and call your supervisor.
And finally, it's vitally important that you remember, don't assume it, prove it.